Today's scripture reading comes from the Holy Bible, Luke 10.
Chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. I suspect you have heard this one many times before. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at Jesus' feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Oh, Martha, Martha," Jesus answered, "you are so anxious and concerned about a million details. But really, only one thing matters. Mary has chosen that one thing, and I won't take it away from her." Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, and that's from the Voice translation of the Bible. So, I have to be completely honest. I have always seriously disliked this particular passage in the Bible. I have puzzled over it for years. I find it really annoying. Why did Jesus take Mary's side? Why? In my imagination, I envision Martha preparing for the visit from Jesus. She is scurrying around the house, cooking, cleaning, maybe putting clean sheets on the bed for Jesus. Meanwhile, Mary is just sitting around. This just doesn't seem right to me. I could never grasp the deeper metaphysical meaning. And I suspect, to be completely honest, that my difficulty with this passage lies in the fact that I completely identify with Martha. You know, taking care of things rather than being present. I am more of a doer, and I have struggled to teach myself how to be more present, more in touch with being. That is why the welcome prayer that I'm going to teach you today has been of great benefit to me, and it does correspond. It's like we were in cahoots somehow. Martha is the busy one, and Mary is the quiet one. They show us the two dimensions of our own humanity. Our own humanity. They represent the difference between doing versus being. Mary represents stillness, presence, listening, or as Jesus called it, the one thing that really matters. The one thing that really matters. Without Mary's stillness at the center of our being, we become like Martha, worried, anxious, disconnected, discontented, and even victimized. Now, there was nothing wrong with Martha's activity. It is how she responds to her busyness that is in question. In fact, she is so troubled by this situation that she asks Jesus to intervene. She laments, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." She resists where she is and what she is doing and wants Jesus to rescue her. Her anxiety and her worry keep her in turmoil and prevent her from being present. So Martha was a bubble of activity. Mary was present with Jesus and made herself available to listen to him. We can use a method like the welcome prayer that I'm going to teach you today to help us merge these two opposing forces of doing versus being, or resisting versus presence. It is a way of bringing alignment to these two polarities. You know, I'm sure you've all heard and have probably even used that little slogan, "Let go and let God." This is a wonderful concept, but I never knew exactly how to implement this idea. The welcome prayer is a method that shows us how. It shows us how to let go. It is an action plan, if you will, for letting go and letting God. Now, I learned the welcome prayer from author Reverend Cynthia Bourgeau, who learned it from its creator, Mary Mrozowski. The welcome prayer has really helped me become more present, less anxious, less driven. It has helped me to be less Martha and more Mary. Bourgeois talks about what she describes as the roar in Martha's mind. I love that word to describe our constant mind chatter. Anyone here have constant mind chatter? The roar. Bourgeois believes that the roar ultimately leads Martha and ourselves to act out of the space of separation from the divine. Or even more so, as we have that mind chatter that the divine is absent altogether. The welcome prayer, the welcome prayer gives us a way to consent to this roar, to consent to the busyness and activity. You know, how many of you have an endless to-do list? This is all about giving consent to that without getting snagged or triggered by what is transpiring. The welcome prayer can act as a bridge, if you will, between Martha and Mary. It is a way to practice saying yes to everyday life. It reminds me of the saying that the diplomat and author, UN Secretary Dag, I think it's pronounced Hammarskjöld, he said the following: "For all that has been, thank you. For all that is to come, yes." Isn't that great? So before we get to the actual welcome prayer itself and when and how to use it, I'd like to offer a little further explanation of why we use it, an exploration of the underlying principle of this powerful prayer. So as you know, in Divine Metaphysics, which is what we study here, we believe that there are certain spiritual laws or divine laws that govern how the universe works. In Divine Metaphysics, these laws are the unchanging principles that rule our entire universe. When we live in harmony with these principles and put them into practice, life flows. We develop ways to live in abundance, success, and inner peace. The spiritual law that most supports the welcome prayer is the law of detachment. I've also heard it called the law of non-resistance. Law of detachment, law of non-resistance. In my humble opinion, this is the most liberating of all the laws. So here is the essence of this law. The level of pain we feel in and about our lives and the circumstances in our lives depends upon the level of resistance to the situation and the present moment. Buddha said it best. It is your resistance to what is that causes suffering. There's a powerful thought. The more we resist something, the more we push something away, the more it controls us. Now, we often think that a certain situation is creating our suffering, but ultimately this is not so. This is just not so. It is our resistance to the situation that is amplifying the suffering. Spiritual teacher and author Eckhart Tolle says it like this: the intensity of the pain we feel depends upon the degree of resistance to the present moment. So we can see many examples of how this law applies in various disciplines. For example, in Jungian psychology, we learn to embrace the shadow, to love the parts of ourselves, especially those parts we hate the most, such as our weaknesses, our shame, our foibles. We are encouraged to befriend that piece that we are at war with, that piece that we wish would go away. A similar theme is found in Taoism, which instructs us to become like water. Water is the perfectly non-resistant, like a river or stream, ever flowing without struggle. Water is really the perfect metaphor for the law of detachment and non-resistance. This is exactly what the law of detachment asks us to do: go with the flow. Whatever arises, love that. If only Martha knew. Martha's resistance to her situation caused her even more suffering. She asked Jesus, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work?" I suspect that there is a little bit of Martha in each one of us. Think about all the energy we put into going against the flow, resisting and resenting certain aspects of our lives, and maybe even certain people in our lives. Consider all the ways we resist where we are, by complaining, by criticizing, by finding fault with ourselves and others, by wishing we were somewhere else, by rehashing the past, by imagining that we will be happy when this thing or that thing happens. These patterns ensure that those very things we want to get rid of even have greater power over us. So the story of Mary and Martha are a metaphor for how to be present and how to not be present. If only Martha knew the truth. That which we resist grows in power and influence in our lives. If only she knew that she could end her suffering by simply allowing and being present. So the welcome prayer is a method for working on our resistance from an internal point of view. From an external point of view, we can put the concepts associated with the welcome prayer into practical application immediately by taking the following steps. Number 1, allow ourselves and those around us to be as they are. Give up our ideas of how things should be and how people should act. And number 2, give up our ideas about how life should look and how life should work. Learn to observe without ascribing meaning. We all do this labeling thing, don't we? Oh, this is good, this is bad, this is okay. When we apply the concept of the welcome prayer, we step back and we give up our resistance, we give up our meaning making. And I'm sure you know this, but here's what happens when you give up your resistance to a situation. When we truly learn to observe and accept, when we move toward the very thing we wish to get rid of, something shifts. Something shifts. As we drop our resistance, as we surrender to the present moment just as it is, we begin to feel more and more space around the situation, and then the situation itself begins to shift. It may even shrink or disappear. The situation may not change. What changes is our perspective on the situation and the end to our suffering. If only Martha knew. I suspect that we've all had this experience of struggling with an issue or a situation, and then at some point consciously choosing to stop engaging in the struggle, giving up our resistance to the situation. And in that instant, the situation is transformed. As we give up our resistance and our struggle, as we step back, it is a sign that we trust the universe to unfold just as it should. I know this has been true for me in many instances in my life. It is how I met my husband. It is how I made it through some very difficult challenges during my seminary journey. I'll spare you the gory details. But I had a long history of, shall we say, troubled relationships. And at some point, I really did decide that I would make the most of being single, give up the idea of finding my life partner and soulmate. Soon after I made that decision, and I really did commit to it, soon after that, I mean literally within months, a couple of months, I met the man who would become my husband and my life partner. Now, Jesus was a big proponent of the law of non-resistance, wasn't he? He was a big proponent of the idea of welcoming whatever arises, especially adversity. In Luke chapter 6, for example, he tells us this: "Whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to him as well. Give your shirt to the one who steals your coat. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him." See what I mean? Here Jesus is inviting us to go toward the very thing that repels us. Step back, Let the space open up around a particular event or person or situation. See what happens. See what happens. Rather than automatically reacting and resisting, as Martha did, Jesus instructs us on how to be with what is, to learn to embrace all of life's experiences. He tells Martha, only one thing matters. Only one thing matters, and that is to be present in this moment in our everyday lives. Learn to witness, learn to befriend your experience. In fact, become a master at accepting and befriending what is. So I don't know how many of you might remember the S training. This tells you my age, but many years ago, I took the S training with Werner Erhard. And his way of describing this was simply to say, choose what you've got. Isn't that brilliant? Choose what you've got. Instead of, I must get rid of this, as we saw in Martha, we are given a model for practicing acceptance in Mary. The more we resist where we are, the more it controls us. If only Martha knew, love whatever arises. Now, let's be clear, this does not mean that whenever we move into this witness state, our desires will automatically be fulfilled. But it does offer us peace and may even allow a better result to unfold. Nor does it mean that we should not try to take appropriate actions to eliminate difficulties in life. What I am suggesting is that the first step in making a change, the first step to inner peace, is to simply watch the experience without judgment and evaluation. See what happens. I suspect that for many of us, our lives are filled with situations and people and events that we don't really want. These unwanted situations come up in our lives for many reasons, but their true value is to help us practice this witness consciousness, observing and accepting without ascribing meaning. And of course, you've heard me say this before, we all know that the difficult people in our lives, you know who I mean, the ones that annoy us and push our buttons, these people are really our teachers. These people are our teachers. These challenging people are the ones we need to spend time with to see what unloved peace within our own selves are being revealed to us through the mirror of this other person. They show us our unloved selves. So, I'm just saying, by accepting what is, just as it is, we liberate ourselves from the very suffering we seek to avoid. Now, there are countless examples of the Martha archetype, if you want to call it that, in each one of us. The person you feel jealousy toward is controlling you. The person you are angry with is in charge of you. Any situation that is causing you to be in a reactive state is running your life. Now you know. Now you can begin to disengage. The wisdom prayer allows us to respond to life, rather than react. It helps to interrupt the usual knee-jerk reactions. So during the meditation, coming up here in a moment, we are going to practice the welcome prayer. You will need to think of a situation from your life that disturbs you, and we will work through the stages of the prayer. You could also think of a person in your life who you have issues with. So before we get to the prayer, just to summarize, the welcome prayer offers us a simple method that is based on the idea that suffering is intensified through our resistance to it. It provides a method of actively letting go of thoughts and feelings that support the false self, or it's also called the reactive self. It is meant to deepen our relationship with God through the consenting to God's presence and action in our everyday, ordinary lives. Now, Cynthia Bourgeot, who I learned the prayer from, she calls it consent on the go. Consent on the go, meaning that we can use it for any and all of our everyday life experiences. We don't have to wait for a special occasion to use it. In fact, it's best when we get in the habit of using it every day in our everyday ordinary business. This is how we tune into the presence of Spirit in our lives at this moment, and at this moment, and at this moment. It is a way to let God, to turn everything over to God. All that is required for this to happen is our willingness and our consent. So the welcome prayer consists of 3 simple movements. In just a moment, I'll walk you through those, and we can use it during our meditation.